development and cooperation. So before I introduce our esteemed panel, let me briefly try to put a context into this very important discussion. There is no doubt that Asia's dynamism, Asia's diversity are indeed unmatched. The 21st century has often been called the Asian century. And that is obviously because of the vast contributions that Asian economies, Asian societies, and Asia's quest to constantly improve have had on the continent and beyond. So as the rise of Asia becomes a topic of discussion across a variety of disciplines and is increasingly gaining a purchase in think tank circles globally, the Asia-Pacific region in particular is uniquely situated in the intersection of regional trade and economic cooperation, and also complex security architectures. The region's leading think tanks have constantly played a leading role in driving trade economic integration, security cooperation policies, and today's panel will seek to address important questions and points, including assessing the Asian century. What are the views from Asia, from leading Asian experts? Secondly, navigating the overlapping economic and strategic blocks. What are the opportunities and challenges for Asian countries ahead of us? Thirdly, developing Asia. What is China's role? And lastly, boosting regional trade and economic ties post-pandemic. What are the recommendations and proposals our panelists would like to bring forward? So without further ado, let me also introduce our scholars, our experts. First of all, we have Professor Rong Ying, Vice President, China Institute for International Studies, CIIS. Welcome. We have thank you. We have with us Professor Masahiro Kawai, Director General, Economic Research Institute for Northeast Asia. Welcome. We have with us Professor Yang Bojiang, Director of Center for Japan Studies, Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. Welcome. Let me also welcome Professor Bert Hoffman, Director of the East Asian Institute, National University of Singapore. Welcome. Professor Tan Shri Michael Yeo, who is President, KSI Strategic Institute for Asia Pacific, Malaysia. Welcome. We have Toby Simon, founder and president, Synergia Foundation, India, Bangalore, India. And lastly, we have Professor Hu Tiang Boon, associate professor and coordinator of the China program at the S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies, RSIS, Nanyang Technology University. Welcome. Welcome. So in this exact order, what we have planned is that first, Professor Rong Ying can give us a regional geostrategic perspective as well on Asia, and then we move from north towards south and west of Asia and get different perspectives from different parts, but also from each perspective, understand the holistic opportunities, also some challenges that Asia as a collective faces, and ideally propose some key solutions. Most importantly, as at CCG, we emphasize, what can we as think tanks and scholars contribute to a better and even more dynamic Asia? So now, without further ado, let me introduce Professor Rong Ying. Professor Rong Ying is the Vice President and Senior Research Fellow of the China Institute of International Studies. He is one of China's top South Asia specialists and is frequently quoted in the press. He has co-edited 2 books, a blue book on international situation of China's foreign affairs and India's rise and the China-India relations. And he has also served in different diplomatic missions of the People's Republic of China as well. So Professor Rong Ying, from your perspective, I mean, as a South Asia expert, as someone who understands East Asia, other regions within Asia, sub-regions within Asia, what are the core challenges and what are the core opportunities for China and Asia?
Thank you. Thank you very much. I really appreciate this. Great appreciation to the organizer CCG for inviting me to speak and also to meet new friends and old friends, even online. You're right. I think Ms. Ahmed talked about my experience, my sort of experience, I mean, sort of resume bios working primarily focused on South Asia, but with some experiences in other areas of Asia. It is true that we look at the. Let me start to make just the three points. First, I think it's true that we're talking about Asian century. I think I would say it's fair to say the Asian century has finally come, but it's the developments we have seen so far. It tells us that we should not take for granted, and there's no room for complacency. This is obvious. I think while the economic, I think Asia has continued demonstrate its vitality, its potential, its dynamism for development. It has also, I think, in particular, I think, in the wake of the crisis, in the wake of in Ukraine, the pandemic, and also the Chinese always like to say the unprecedented, unseen changes, transformation that are taking place in 1 century. The 20th Party Congress has put forward a vision to build the Chinese modernization, which I think will bring more opportunities for the region. We have also very much impressed by the diplomatic sort of skills and the capabilities of Asian countries, particularly ASEAN's, the 3 summit meetings, in a way that has now playing an important, growing role in global regional governance and global governance, transform itself from sort of rule takers to rule makers or agenda takers or agenda setters. These are the very unique and important development. Having said that, which is my second point, is that we have to be also aware there are some signs, some developments that would have to call our attention. And first and foremost, I think there are the 2 contrasting trends in terms of development. One is, as we have seen, that continuously, I think Asia has shown a tendency, a habit of cooperation based on mutual understanding, mutual support for win-win cooperation. On the other hand, there are also worrying trend where I think attempts are made to divide instead of unite, to decouple instead of pushing for cooperation. And furthermore, there are some countries in the region and beyond pursue a kind of Indo-Pacific strategy with Cold War sort of colors, if I can say, which if that would be as disturbed, severely the development, the productivity of the region, and run the risk of turning the region in the arena of major country competition or rivalry. And related to that, I think some countries' region remains very much difficulties in terms of achieving a sustainable development, economic recovery has been uneven, and some regional hotspot issues remain very much contentious and beyond the sort of any realistic solutions in the near future. The last point some ideas how we can pursue cooperation and collaboration in the region. I think the President Xi in his meetings at APEC put forward and initiate the future, a very important initiative, and it has to be followed through and implemented jointly with the support and understanding of the country and the region. First and foremost, I guess we have to work hard to strive for a new kind of thinking, framework of thinking to adapt to the reality that Asia has always been a diverse region, and should strive to work. For mutual learning instead of, I think, division and confrontation. And secondly, efforts should be made to support and strive for a stable major country relationship by taking positive and constructive views about each other's development. And lastly, I think continued efforts should be made to strive for a regional architecture for cooperation by adopting true multilateralism, open regionalism, and in the process of working for post-pandemic recovery in terms of striving more cooperation in the areas of connectivity, high quality connectivity, and stable, resilient supply chains. Excuse me. Working together to pursue energy transition, green transition, digital economy, a lot of things to give more impetus for economic development cooperation. And also, I think working together to have a better dialogue, communication, and a synergy for various development regional initiatives. Some of them are very much, I think, looking at the same things while with different emphasis. I shall stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Professor Ronging. And really, if I could briefly summarize the points, I think one very interesting aspect you mentioned is that the very pragmatism, the very, ability of Asia to embrace the diversity and dynamism that has resulted in what we may today call or interpret as the Asian century. May be at risk because we see maybe am I audible? Yes. Of threatening your divisive kind of multilateralism. And there are potential ways, lastly, that you mentioned in which these new emerging challenges can perhaps be better addressed. So now let's move to our next panelist, Professor Masahiro Kawai. I'll briefly introduce you and then try and pose a question leading from Professor Ronging's remarks. So Professor Kawai is economics and finance expert, and you have worked on Asian economic integration at the Asian Development Bank as well. You were the chief economist for the World Bank's East Asia and the Pacific region, as well as deputy vice minister of finance for international affairs of Japan's Ministry of Finance. And you also served as the special advisor to the ADB. Your focus, your publications particularly focus on Asian economic integration. So Professor Kawai, Professor Ronging, under the overarching concept ideas that we're trying to understand, mentions new emerging challenges to Asian multilateralism, Asian integration, forces of divisiveness. Do you perceive the same trends? And if so, what are potential solutions? And also your understanding of what are the potential possibilities, opportunities for Asia that we ought to capture, that we ought to benefit from? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I would like to thank Dr. Wang of the Center for China and Globalization to invite me to this very important forum. I respond to the moderator's questions in my presentation. I want to take up 3 points today. First, I want to talk about risks to the Asian century. And I want to talk consequences of such risks. And I want to say that if appropriate solutions are found, it is still possible to realize the Asian century. I take the view that the Asian century has yet to be realized. First, what are the risks to the Asian century scenario? Well, the ADB published a report in 2011 entitled Asia 2050, Realizing the Asian Century. Okay? And it predicted the 21st century to be an Asian century in the sense that Asia will produce more than 50% of global GDP by 2050. Well, ADB identified several risks to this Asian century scenario. One of the most important risks identified was the middle income trap. The middle income trap means that middle income countries cannot move up to the rank of high income countries with a per capita national income of more than 13,000 US dollars. But only a few economies in Asia, such as Japan, Korea, Taiwan, and Singapore, have been able to achieve this objective to get out of the middle income trap. Other middle income countries have not been able to move to high income countries because of several reasons. For example, the loss of international cost competitiveness due to rapid rises of wages without productivity growth. Second, lack of productivity growth due to limited investment in infrastructure, human capital, R&D, and innovation. Third, economic and financial crisis due to the collapse of real estate bubbles, capital outflows, and banking sector vulnerabilities. Fourth, social and political instability as a result of rising inequality, corruption, and environmental damage. Under this middle income trap, Asia's GDP would be only about 30% of global GDP, according to the ADB study. I would add to this middle income trap what I call the Asian catastrophe risk due to possible political and security conflicts within Asia and or with outside of Asian countries. This Asian catastrophe risk may result from military conflict in the Korean Peninsula, major conflicts between large Asian countries, or military confrontation between China and the United States. The great power confrontation between the United States and China may result in economic fragmentation, not only between the two countries, but also between the West and East. Here, the West includes the G7 countries and the European Union, and the East includes China and Russia, given that the West has already imposed sanctions against Russia and attempts to decouple Russia from their economies after the Russian invasion of Ukraine. This argument suggests that world economic fragmentation is a major risk to the Asian century. So what would be the economic consequence of world economic fragmentation? I argue that this cost or economic consequence is very negative and very serious. World economic fragmentation means that trade and investment between the two blocks will be significantly reduced. Supply chains will be divided between the two blocks, and flows of information, knowledge, ideas, technologies, and human talents between the two blocks will be severely cut. Fragmentation will reduce economic efficiency, increase production costs, and lead to lower GDP in the world. The IMF and WTO both predict significant costs, and costs are higher for China than the rest of the world because of China's significant interdependence with the global economy. So this suggests that it is in the best interest of all countries, including China and others, to avoid such economic fragmentation. So my final point I want to make is that it's still possible to avoid fragmentation in the world economy and realize an Asian century, even though some economic decoupling in the high-tech sector related to national security may take place. Okay? To avoid world economic fragmentation into two blocks, I would like to suggest several points. First, great power competition between the United States and China needs to be managed to avoid their military confrontation. Second, the two countries, China and the United States, need to seek cooperation on issues that are common to them, common interest to them, such as climate change, pandemics, and external debt problems in developing countries. And the coverage of economic security measures taken by China and the United States and other countries should be limited to areas directly related to national security so as to avoid a large-scale fragmentation in the world economy. So here, Japan can also contribute to avoiding world economic fragmentation by building a constructive and stable bilateral relationship with China. Of course, for Japan, the United States is a key security ally and a major economic partner. But at the same time, China is also a very important economic partner. At the Kishida-Shu summit held in November this year, several common understandings were shared. They decided to promote economic and people-to-people exchanges, and building on their common understandings, Japan and China can promote economic and people-to-people exchanges. They can discuss common issues like aging population, medical healthcare problems, income disparity issues, real estate bubble problems, and so forth. They can revitalize trade and investment by further developing RCEP into a higher level trade agreement. They can conduct pre-consultation on CPTPP, which China is very much interested in joining. And also, they can hold policy dialogue on WTO reform. And of course, the two countries can respond to global challenges. In conclusion, Asia is at the crossroads of whether it can continue to grow rapidly and realize an Asian century. Asian countries need to continue to work hard to get out of the middle income trap and avoid the Asian catastrophe in a cooperative way. It's vital that Asia and the rest of the world make every effort to avoid global economic fragmentation. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Professor Kawai. And really, when you mention, the middle income trap as well as the potential catastrophes, it seems economic engagement, and RCEP as well as CPTPP, these avenues can be a very viable solution, very viable way forward for Asian economies, for Asian people to be to step forward and from your perspective, to actually materialize, to achieve the Asian century. So with that, let me also invite Professor Yang Bo-Chiang, who is a Japanese expert, a Japan expert, and he is the director of Center for Japan Studies at the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. You have your PhD in law from the University of International Relations, and you are also the director of the Institute of Japanese Studies, where you have focused extensively on China, Japan, but also on potential economic potentials between both countries and Asia. So, Professor, from your perspective, Professor Kawai just mentioned the potential, the untapped potential in Asia. So how do you perceive China, Japan, and Asia as such, especially when it comes to multilateral economic cooperation, RCEP, CPTPP, etc.? The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me here to join all of you to participate in such a high-level panel discussion. Since you have such a distinguished interpreters online, I'd like to proceed with my native language, Chinese Mandarin. Okay. 非常感谢 CCG.
I would like to thank CCG for inviting me to attend today's discussion. Just now, Mr. Rongyan and Professor Kawai gave excellent presentations. I would like to also add to their excellent presentations with some basic analysis. I want to make 3 points. First, Asia century certainty, likelihood of the prospects of
从经济增长来看的话，那么亚洲在世界上的
growth, the ratio of Asia in the world economy is increasing. Its political position in the world is also improving. One phenomenon is very clear. In the 1970s, there was the G7 group. After 2008, then there were the Group 20, G20 summit mechanism in Asia. You can see there is a very clear fragmentation of power in Asia. In the 1970s, Japan was very active on the global arena as sort of a representative of Asia, and China is the member of the Security Council. But unlike today is very different. In the next few years, in terms of economic growth, the world, in the top 5 economies, apart from America, the other 4 members, competitors for the remaining 4 members in the top 5 will more or less come from China, Asia, including China, India, Japan, Indonesia. Even today, for countries like Korea, the economy already ranks number 10 in the world. Secondly, whether we can really achieve Asia century, there are still some uncertainties.
How to define the concept of Asia or the century of Asia? How to define it? I think we could understand it from all aspects, including not only the hard power, and including also the soft power, GDP, and also the values, as well as the ideologies and values. Whether or not the values are leading the world or not, and at the same time, In terms of the political values, we can see a lot of disparities and gaps. In terms of the cultural values, we can see a lot in common. So in the critical values, whether or not we can formulate sort of consensus of the cultural values and all the way further down to the generous and commonly accepted cultural value norms. That is something that we have to look at as the basis for sustainability of the concept of Asia. And also 80 years has been passed after the World War II. Countries in Asia has accumulated a lot of experiences and practices of economic development. Right now, we are waiting to enhance and upgrade these experiences and practices into something like a theory as a guiding principles for other countries. And in many aspects, all countries have achieved a lot of prominent achievements. So the achievements of the growth and achievements of the technology advancements done by Asian countries, that could not be defined by the concept of Western countries. So the current status quo of China and other countries in Asia, actually, any theories from Western countries cannot practically explain very well. So in terms of the regional cooperation, especially the solutions provided to tackle the current situations and the problems, Asian countries have to come up with their own solutions by themselves. I have one experience to share with you. In 2003, I visited Brookings Institute for further study. And during this study, the cabinet of Japanese governments, they insist in honoring the rights of the Yasukuni Shrine, and that poses a lot of challenges actually between each other in terms of the relations. And we are waiting for actually the bottom line to come and the last jaw to drop. Yes, for several consecutive years of respecting Yasukuni Shrine by Japanese prime ministers actually aroused a lot of anger of Chinese people. But violence is something that's not pursued by Chinese people. We do not want to wage any violence against anything. And I deeply feel that the cultural divide between China and the US, and also the cultural differences between West and East, is like huge. So our solutions to tackle and cope with the problems also totally different. Probably in the future, we also have to look at Chinese solutions or the Asian country solutions squarely. There's a lot of advantages of Asian countries, so not a credit from the thousands of years of the civilization. So all the struggles against the colonizing countries of 4th century. We believe that the Asian countries become independent very shortly, actually. And so Asian pattern and Asian's methodologies and Asian theory of development actually would decline anything like either or either white or black. And I remember U.S. Former President George W. Bush called for the diplomatic countries to fight against terrorism. And there is one statement emphasizing, so means that you are either our friends or enemies, or partly. If you are only partly our friends, you are our enemies. But the reality is that in Asian countries, the two Asian countries, between the white and the black, there is some buffer zone. There are a lot of gray areas, and we have a lot of countries staying in these gray areas. So there is diverse experiences in Asian countries, and just like several years ago, the Malaysia diplomat, that is 10 Asian or Asians think. So this is something that we have developed a theory based on these best practices and experiences. And that is the statement made by Professor Kishore Mahbubani. So the development of Asia in the future would come from the diversity of the development that would not be featured by a single country as a great power. And we can complex the development and the features of the different countries in Asia. And previously, Asian countries are suffering from a lot of historical events like invasion and also the wars between the different countries, and they suffer from the spillover effects from these wars for centuries. And so for Asian countries, we are pursuing peace and development more than ever and more than any other regions. And so whether or not this peace can sustain in the future, that is actually determined by whether or not the solution can be provided to cope with our internal problems within China. There are three aspects that we have to care most. The first one is that we have tried best to expand the commonality for cooperation. There are a lot of framework for cooperation in Asia, including RCEP, BRI, CPTPP, and so on and so forth. So I think all of these frameworks have their existence, reasons, and have pros and cons. And I think in Asia, this framework is supposed to serve the bundling and common prosperity and convergence of the different countries, so that we can formulate the commonalities and constraints on the confrontation. So the cooperation, economic cooperation, not to pursue only the sake of economic benefits, but pursue further on the coexistence of the, different countries. So I think the cooperation is actually something beyond the economic benefits. Second, we have to look for the regional featured governance in Asia, because ASEAN methodology or model is different from EU model. For example, the way of promoting the cooperation is progressive, it's pragmatic, and also takes slow, and mainly featured by the sovereign countries instead of some international organizations. So this international organization, international cooperation within Asia countries, they need to respect the features and also the conditions of Asian countries, especially in terms of the governance cooperation. For example, the past 3 years of the COVID-19 prevention by China provided a lot of opportunities for us right now at this particular moment. And in terms of the environment, climate change, and the health, and also the biological development, I think there's a lot to cooperate with each other. For example, China, Japan, and South Korea, actually we have something in common, and we have a lot, of course, disagree with each other, but we are in the same geographical area. There's a lot for us to cooperate. And the second is that the strategic dialogue is very important, because for a long time in the past, we yet to develop the security featured framework. And that is due to some historical reasons. In 1949, funding of PRC, the Cold War already began. So the PRC since its inception is faced with the external environment featured by Cold War. So the regional political security framework by that time could not stand for the current status quo. Also, after several decades, we have resumed the diplomatic relations with some Western countries, including US. But the US, they have their own partners, but they are cooperating not only with their friends, but also with the countries like China for economic pursuits and trading pursuits. So I think that is the fundamental change from now versus 5 decades ago. But of course, there is something yet to be fundamentally changed, including, for example, the security issues. So the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and US and the EU, well, I think these are the 3 pillars in terms of the security featured framework. So China-US relations and the China-Japan relations and the China together with some other countries' relations, they need to work together, merge together, and we need to are determined to pursue the commonality to make up for the loopholes. So all in all, from the current situation, Asian countries need to avoid two trends. One is the regional parallelization that is stated by Darling several decades ago. And then second is the camping development of the political issues. So we have to honor the responsibility of the civilization, and we have to pursue the common prosperity, and also we have to show our role model in the Asian countries. Thank you.
I'm very. If you have another sentence you would like to add, that's fine. But we're really the time is a little bit limited, so I apologize to abrupt. Please continue. You would like to wrap up quickly.
没有打断，我刚刚结束，我刚刚结束了。
Thank you. Okay, great.
我刚刚说完。恰好说完了最后一句话，
Yeah, just in time. My last sentence has been finished.
Thank you so much, Professor Yang Boqiang. And really, I think you've highlighted very important aspects. I mean, especially I appreciate that concept between black and white. There's a lot of space. You know, we don't need to think in black and white or in binaries. And if Asian countries, if Asian civilizations, I mean, we reflect back, we will be able to find a lot of space, a lot of commonalities, a lot of room for convergence. And here now, let me invite Professor Bert Hoffman, who is based in Singapore. He is the director of the East Asian Institute at the National University of Singapore. And he has previously worked in Indonesia, the Philippines, Korea, and Mongolia. He has published extensively on fiscal policy, debt issues, and China and Indonesia's recent economic history. Professor Bert, I would like to request, I mean, based on Professor Boqiang's comments as well, does East Asia, do other Asian countries, I mean, do they feel a new wave of challenges amidst this so-called competition? If so, how can these challenges be addressed? Your outlook for Asia, and within 5 to 6 minutes would be ideal. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Goodness, you just cut 2 minutes from my speech, but
okay.
The upside of that is that I agree with much of what the previous speakers have done, have said. I will not present my slides because that will cost too much time, but I will talk from my slides in the background. And the questions that you asked, Madam Chairperson, are exactly the right ones. Is there a way out? And clearly, first I'd like to make the remark that yes, it may be the Asian century, but it is not yet the Asian century. The Western world, or say North America and Europe, if you add them up, are still 50% of the world economy. If you add up all of Asia, you come to around 30% of the world economy. And similarly with trade. Similar divide along those lines. Of course, Asia is rising. Kawai has already mentioned that is not a given. For any developing country, there is a risk of the middle income trap. There is a risk of conflict, which is dramatically bad for development, historically speaking. And there are some centers of potential conflict in Asia as well as in the rest of the world. And even though we before the Russian invasion of the Ukraine, we sort of thought that the world was a much more peaceful place than in the past, that is not necessarily a given going forward. But if things go right, Goldman Sachs just brought out a report in the world in 2075, where China would be the largest economy in the world, India would be number 2, the United States would be number 3, and Indonesia and Nigeria 4 and 5. So 3 out of the 5 countries in the top 5 would be Asian. And you also have Pakistan as one of the larger ones down the road. Japan still plays a role in the top 15, but is way, way down. So there will be, on top, there will be 2 Asian countries. And the question is, how will they shape the world order at that particular point in time? Now, I know China much more than India, but I do know that both countries are really quite different. And talking about conflict, there are some scrummages at the border as we speak between the 2 countries. So it is not necessarily that there is an Asian view on that future. And I believe that is going to be one of the big challenges as this Asian century unfolds. One of the key risks, and we're right in the middle of it, is that Asia has, of course, done very well as part of globalization. As a matter of fact, China, and they have acknowledged that repeatedly, the leadership has acknowledged that many times, China has benefited tremendously from the existing world order. And trade has been a very big part of it. The WTO has been a very big part of it. And on the back of that, the countries fared very well. The trouble is, though, that WTO is getting a little bit outmoded, and some real issues of tension in trade currently are not addressed in the WTO. And I think that is one of the critical threats to further integration, to further globalization, to further productivity gains, as Kawai already pointed out. And the differences are, of course, numerous. They're on data issues, on environmental issues, industrial policy and state support, on what this resilience after the pandemic should be. And probably the biggest one is the rise of national security. Yes, in the United States, but not just in the United States. As a matter of fact, across the region, across the world, national security has jumped to the fore in the recent years. And the WTO is well, they have an exception on national security, but there's not even agreement about what that exception means. So the United States says, well, it's an exception, and therefore we can do anything. But the WTO itself, the arbitration panel, say, no, this is actually limitation. But irrespective, there's a dispute there at the very heart of the WTO, and that needs to be resolved. In terms, let me come to solutions, because I only have 6 minutes and I have 4 left, two left, I think. But so first is really, I think, encouraging sandboxes for regulatory reforms. A few countries, like-minded countries, hopefully small countries like Singapore, they can just start solving problems. And as a matter of fact, they have done so. CPTPP started as such. Singapore and Brunei and New Zealand and Chile started to talk, and they said, well, we can, as a small club, we can agree on these difficult issues. Now it's become a bigger agreement. Similarly with data, Singapore, Australia, New Zealand, and Chile have started a data trade agreement, which is very important as a model for the rest. I believe the national security would be great to be next in that sandbox. Second, I think making existing trade agreements work better through regulatory deepening, as Kawai already pointed out, but also through increased membership. And of course, the big opportunity in Asia is India joining RCEP. I know that's a big jump, but I want to have said it because it's going to be a major addition to the Asian integration if possible. And third, and again, I think Kawai said something similar, is use the G20 as a platform for reaching some sort of a consensus on those very difficult issues. And they won't go away, those issues, but getting an agreement where everybody is reasonably unhappy rather than making everybody happy is, I think, the crux for going forward. And that includes issues as industrial policy, state support, yes, the national security question, and the greening of the world economy. Thank you very much.
Wow, thank you so much, Professor Bert Hoffman. That was 6 minutes, and I hope you feel satisfied with the points you highlighted, because really, I mean, we understand the challenge, we understand the complexity of the challenge, we understand the future dynamism. You mentioned so many other, Pakistan is my country, so usually we don't get a mention, but it's true that many countries right now that are not maybe performing like their other Asian counterparts have immense potential. And then the need to initiate, the need to take ownership. I think that's what I take from your last point, where Singapore, I mean, they had a few other countries, they realized these are the problems, these are the solutions, and that's how CPTPP was formed. So now let's invite Professor Michael Yeo, who is the president of KSI Strategic Institute for Asia Pacific. You have also, Professor Yeo has also headed, been a representative for Malaysia on the ASEAN High-Level Task Force on Connectivity and commissioner in the Royal Commission of Police. You have contributed books as well to this with the Center of China and Globalization. You have published. So Professor Michael Yeo, from your point of view as a think tanker as well as someone who has been part of the practical dialogue, what can be done to achieve? I mean, Professor Kawai, Professor Bo Jiang, even Professor Bert Hoffman, they all mention we need to strategize, find solutions. what can think tanks, what can platforms like us help push us forward towards needed strategy in order to actually realize the Asian century? And within 6 minutes would be so ideal. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Firstly, I must thank Dr. Henry Wang and CCG for inviting me once again to share some thoughts at your always valuable and informative forums. I have 5 key points to share. Number one, I think China-ASEAN partnership will continue to strengthen in the years ahead. At the recent China-ASEAN summit in Phnom Penh last month, we see consensus reached between China and ASEAN to move forward on strengthening the China-ASEAN partnership. China is being the largest trading partner of all of the ASEAN countries for more than 10 years, and we see this continue to grow. We also see the BRI benefiting ASEAN countries in terms of infrastructure development, particularly the building of roads, railways, ports, and harbors. Perhaps what we can do as think tanks is to forge a network of collaboration among think tanks in China and ASEAN, but this can also include a wider network of East Asia think tanks as well. We need to continue to enlarge this capacity for regional collaboration and exchange of views. Secondly, I think we need to address the major challenge of building back better after the COVID pandemic. And there has to be greater focus among our countries, our governments, with the support of the private sector and with inputs from think tanks to further enhance various post-pandemic economic recovery plan. ASEAN has developed an ASEAN post-pandemic economic recovery framework, and this needs to also include the private sector, which is important to ensure that the business community is able to complement governments on building back better programs. Thirdly, I would like to very briefly mention what I consider to be the 4 E's challenges facing Asia and the region. One is economic. The economic growth and economic recovery, economic prosperity has to be a key priority for Asia. Second, education. We need to further enhance and strengthen human capital development to ensure that we have the skills and resources for our graduates and for our youth to have jobs of the future. And very often we face in many of our countries a mismatch between supply and demand of human capital. Thirdly, we need to focus on energy, the energy transition to a low carbon economy, and building on efforts to enhance collaboration in green energy and green transition is a key challenge that we all need to address. The 5th E that I would like to share is the environment. We need to enhance collaboration on climate change and climate action, and this needs to include also the business community as well as the think tanks and the academic community as well, to ensure that we build a sustainable and inclusive future. And in this regard, I would like to perhaps suggest that think tanks in the region can take on a very active role in promoting and advancing the SDGs. We have some collaborative efforts with some of the think tanks in the region where we look at collaboration on some of the key SDGs where we can advance further. The 4th point I'd like to share is, again, what I would consider the 4 I's challenges facing the region: innovation, infrastructure, investment, integrity. The region needs a lot of new innovation, and I think the more innovation that we can create, the better will be for the future prosperity of our region. We also need a lot of huge investments in infrastructure development. And this is where I think developed countries like China, like Japan, South Korea can contribute to many of us in Southeast Asia. So we need huge investments in infrastructure. We need also investments to scale up our productive capacity, investments in green logistics, in green partnerships. We in the UN SCAP Sustainability Network have been proposing the establishment of a Asia-Pacific Green Deal, where we would hope to have green investments and focusing on green supply chain and green production. The final I that I would like to stress is integrity. I think many of our countries face challenges of governance and integrity and transparency and accountability. This is one area that I think think tanks can put a strong focus on. Just my final quick point before I end is the need to foster greater collaboration among think tanks in the Asia-Pacific region. And here I think we perhaps need to identify areas that we can work together and areas of priority and prioritization for the think tanks. I suggested earlier the need to focus on sharing ideas, sharing experiences on the SDGs. That can be one area, but there can be other areas that we can look on that have been mentioned and stressed by our other speakers. One final point is, I think one way forward for think tank collaboration is to work on global governance. And I think global governance, in my mind, also include reforms to the international financial architecture. And perhaps if we are able to collaborate on some of these areas, we would be able to build a better future for our region. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Professor Michael Yeo. And really, I mean, especially you mentioned a few points that are priority areas for CCG. For example, talent development. Also, we have recently had an activity on climate change. Global governance is the purpose for also the Global Young Leaders Dialogue that Secretary General Dr. Mabel Miao founded. So how can think tanks, youth, governments, I mean, how can we come together to address the core challenges that are shared towards a shared community, a shared future? This is something that think tanks must proactively work towards. Now, let me welcome Toby Simon, President and founder of Synergia Foundation. And this is a think tank that works closely between academia, industry, and government to establish impactful solutions. We have, Toby Simon, we have cooperated in the past as well. I think India has come up a few times in this discussion on the panel. So it is very important for us, you know, for East Asia, for Asia at large, to understand what is the Indian perspective. India is yet, for example, not a member of RCEP, and there have been missed opportunities between China and India in the past as well. So where do you, as an Indian think tank, see the future of India within Asia? What are the core opportunities, and what do you think are the major challenges we face as a continent? Please, and within 6 minutes again would be perfect. Thank you. You're muted. You will need to unmute. Yes. Thank you.
Yeah. Good morning, Zoom. I want to thank Anne, yourself, and Henry for giving us this opportunity to speak, and I will definitely keep it under 6 minutes. I would try to put it in 3 frames. One is the context in which we are speaking, largely India within Asia. The second is the characteristics of what I think is likely to happen, and finally put out some caveats. Okay. First, Asia is in the middle of a historic transformation, we all know, and if we continue this trajectory by 2050, the per capita income would rise 6-fold. In terms of purchasing power parity to reach Europe's level today. But you know, our earlier speakers have flagged some red flags, so I just don't want to repeat it. But let me say the characteristics. The Asian century is going to be characterized, according to us, by the following, and we have to live how to adapt with it. One, the fragmentation of the economy, the internet, and global institutions. And what does that mean? Second, very important, the contested global commons. Whether it is in the South China Sea or in the Indian Ocean, we will have to be bracing for it. Third, equally important, the weaponization of everything that we do now, trade, economy, and technology, which is causing a certain amount of tension in different parts of the world, disrupted supply chains, especially in the areas of semiconductor. 5, advanced technologies will continue to dominate the narrative on how nations fare in future, be it Japan, be it South Korea. Every nation knows that unless they are able to make rapid strides in advanced technologies, there is going to be a challenge on how their economies will shape up. The next point is
Let's wait for a couple of seconds. We have a signals problem, correct?
are going to target.
Okay, Toby, we lost you for about 15 seconds there.
Okay, so I will go back, sorry. So
Okay.
I just said that the Asian century is going to be characterized by the following. One, it is the fragmentation of economy, internet, and global institutions. Second, every global commons is going to be contested, be it in the South China Sea, the Indian Ocean, or in the Malacca Straits. Number 3, the weaponization of everything that we have, trade, economy, and technology. 4, disruptive supply chains, which include what we have seen with the semiconductors and other technologies. 5th, we have advanced technologies will continue to dominate the narrative on how nations fare. And that's going to be the future. Countries that can't latch on to advanced technologies would be definitely left behind. 5, the rise of knowledge-enabled weapons of mass destruction, which is robotics plus nanotechnology plus AI. And these are weapons that can be developed in small labs, perhaps in the backyard of your homes. You don't need big industrial complexes to do this. Threats to critical infrastructure, nations unleash it when you have conflicts. And this is another major problem, and which is also tied to global governance. And how do you handle this? I would just add energy security with the focus on fuels like hydrogen, etc. That could be some of the things that people would look away. The next would be climate change, and finally, it would be the race for critical and critical raw material. This would be the paradigm in which the competition within Asia and who will develop faster, according to me, would determine. Now, let me add another thought. Our world is now entering into a sort of a period of vertical globalization. The geopolitics blocks are forming according to interest. And an prime example is the lithium alliance that is being eyed by Mexico, which nationalized its lithium industry earlier this year and will bring together, and they hope to bring together, countries like Argentina, Bolivia, and Chile, the 4 nations controlling most of world's lithium. And this is the same in terms of several raw material, you're going to find this. So you'll have a new paradigm in Asia, which is going to be on 2 pivots. One, we will see deeper challenges to Western domination of the world, and the emergence of a multi-aligned, multipolar world, where countries will choose to align depending on the issue. And you have seen how India has reacted to the current conflict in Ukraine vis-a-vis Russia on how they import oil. Second, we will see the return of success to many Asian societies, including China and India. And the red flag here is that these 2 large Asian countries must settle its border disputes and live to learn together as they have lived for more than 5,000 years without maps or boundaries. If we don't do this, there are collateral consequences that can come, which can put the entire region into risk. Finally, we might see the rise of outliers like Turkey, Iran, etc. coming. And it is so important for us to know what these countries would do in creating the larger narrative in Asia. Now, finally, to manage this challenges that we have in Asia, I think the biggest challenge will be how do we arbitrage and manage increasing inequality caused by technology within countries, which would undermine social cohesion and stability, and the rise of fringe thoughts. The second would be the intense competition for finite natural resources. Third would be water wars. which is another huge problem. And I think finally will be the question how we manage this with the sort of institutional capacity that we have. And most of the capacity will have to be managed within our area because you will slowly see the fading away of larger global institutions like the UN. So it will be global problems, but we will have to solve it locally. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Toby Simon. Really, I think the last point, global problems, but they have to be conceived, understood, and solved locally. That's a point that previously Professor Bert Hoffman also brought up, a few other of our experts, that we need to start developing consensus amongst each other. And China, India, this is also a very important relationship that goes thousands of years, and there's immense potential if both countries cooperate better. Now, let me invite our last speaker, Hu Tiangbun, Professor Hu Tiangbun, Associate Professor and Coordinator of the China Program at the Rajaratnam School of International Studies. Professor Boon, you look at, China and Taiwan, US-China, you have been deeply involved in bilateral and trilateral strategic dialogues. Given, all of the input, all of the expert insights we have received, where do you see Asia moving forward? Is there potential for unity on issues that currently may be dividing us? Is there potential? What can scholars, what can think tanks, what can we do as Asians to push towards a more united Asia, a more effective Asia, a protected Asia from possible disunity or competitions?
Thank you, Chair. I'll try to keep my points within 5 minutes because I'm aware that we are tight for time and that this next panel actually starts at 3:15. So I'll try to keep it short. First of all, I'd just like to thank CCG, in particular, Dr. Henry Wang and Anne for inviting me to be part of this distinguished panel. And everything that I say here will be just my own personal perspectives. And I actually have about 4 points, but due to time, I'll just cut it down to the 2 most important points. And these points relate to the question that the chair has posed to be about what should we do given this greater fragmentation facing us in Asia, right? I think, first of all, we have to recognize the current strategic reality and the key cause of, the leading cause of what scholars have described deglobalization or the retrenchment of globalization is incidentally US-China competition, right? Of course, it's not the only cause. There's a variety of other external causes, including the war in Ukraine. But US-China competition, unfortunately, for all of us living in Asia, is now the primary strategic context, and it is now the new format facing all of us. And obviously from there, there'll be repercussions. And one of the key, the competition itself is a driver, and one of the key consequences is this phenomenon of deglobalization and greater fragmentation, right? The other day I was reading about what the chairman of TSMC, Maurice Chang, and he was commenting about the move of TSMC's plants, fabrication plants of semiconductors to Arizona. And his justification is that globalization is almost dead. That's what he said, right? Although I don't actually agree with him on the almost dead part, but I'll say that it is clearly broken in its current state. And here I fully agree with what my colleague, Professor Bert Hoffman, has mentioned, that essentially national security concerns have superseded economic logics, right? In the good old days of unfettered globalization, people are talking about economies of scale, right? Producing at places where the costs are lowest. But right now, production and economic logic is based on national security. This basically brings a huge problem, because what exactly is national security, right? It is essentially defined by the government of the day. And if you theoretically, almost everything can be securitized, even food. So this basically means that for a lot of the production of goods and services, including services, there will be a cost, a premium to it that takes into account supply chain inefficiencies and basically the price to pay for protecting national security. And this means that if this goes on, the likelihood is that inflation or price increases, this, notwithstanding the best attempts of the US to try to manage it, but essentially, inflation and higher prices seems to me will be a long structural situation. I hope I'm wrong, of course. My second quick final point is that this also leads to something which earlier on Kawai-san has mentioned about great power competition must be managed, since we know that a leading cause of fragmentation is great power competition. So, it says the solution is that great power competition must be managed. But this leaves me with a question and a sense of helplessness, in the sense that this competition is basically managed by the great powers themselves. What if they don't manage this competition well? What about the rest of us? We don't want to be collateral damage. So that this leads to the next question: what can others do? What can China's neighbors and those of us living in this region, with strong ties with both countries, what can we do to help the powers manage their competition? Of course, outsiders have limited role, but we, at the same time, I would suggest that we have a certain level of agency too. So how to do so, I think, is a question that we can better think about. It is often mentioned that between both China and the US, they must establish guardrails. But I think the rest of us, the neighbors of China living around this region, we can create this fertile soil to ensure that the guardrails stay firm. I think I'll just leave it as that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Tiang Boon. Really, I think what a beautiful point to, for now, conclude the discussion. We, the smaller countries, the neighbors of China, other countries, have agency. Let's explore that. Let's create that fertile ground. And now let me invite Dr. Wang Huiyao, President of the Center for China and Globalization, for questions, remarks, and to really conclude our discussion.
Can you hear me? Okay, good. Now we have the voice. Okay, good. No, I think it's really fascinating to hear all of you this afternoon. It's really a great gathering here, and I appreciate all you taking time to come. And I think just one comment. I think that Professor Kawai-san mentioned about Asian century, and of course we mentioned about fragmentation, Taobi, and all others. And of course, Bird has actually talked about also how we can get Asian all together. So I'm just thinking, we have ASEAN, very successful, and of course also we have now two largest trade agreement in the world, in this part of the world, RCEP and CPTPP. So I'm thinking, maybe economic alliance, we could have more Asian integration. That is really the way. Has been proven successful, and we should do more of that. So I think maybe we could have more Asian strategic independence, maybe just borrowing the EU word. Let's get toward that, and let's go more united and more working together, so that Asian as a region will actually become very important in the future. So I think all the comments you made are very helpful, and I really appreciate. I think time is there. I will just stop here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Wang. Thank you to all of our panelists. Thank you for your time. And really, I think this discussion has helped us also on the panel, as well as our audience, better understand potential opportunities for Asia, and further strengthens our resolve towards, like Professor Dr. Wang just said, strategic dependence. Please.
I just want to add one more, is that, of course, there's another economic framework in addition to the RCEP, CPTPP. Now we are Japan and 7 ASEAN countries, plus Australia, New Zealand, and of course US too, also propose Indo-Pacific economic framework. So if it's an economic framework, I mean, China is one of the largest economy in this part of the world. Why not China also join that? So let's push for all those economic cooperation for the Asian century. So that'd be really another addition of economic alliance that we hope to promote, like we always do. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Wang. Thank you, all of our panelists. And I think we should have a day-long discussion on potential, opportunities, avenues for Asian cooperation. So let's reconnect very soon. Thank you once again. Thank you for being a part of the 7th China and World Think Tank Forum. This has been a meaningful experience for all of us. Thank you. Goodbye for now. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
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 See you.